we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
Footsteps creaking on the floor. Shadows leaking through the door. Phantoms, devils, ghouls, and more. Ghost Stories 2024.
Most of the ghost stories that we hear take place on dry land, inside a house, a hotel, or even within a patch of moonlit forest. But in Wimberley, Texas, there is a literal dive into darkness, in a water-filled hole in the earth called Jacob's Well. Located at 1699 Mount Sharp Road in Hays County, Jacob's Well is the mouth of a freshwater spring. The opening is about 12 feet in diameter. It is a drop-off from clear shallows into a water-buried labyrinth of tunnels and chambers. Jacob's Well has seen its share of visitors peering down from above, and those who were just too curious about what lies beneath. Swimmers, snorkelers, scuba divers, and for this reason, Jacob's Well has seen far too many corpses. This place was once a great mystery. What was known was only what could be seen from the surface or on short and shallow dives. Back in the 1930s, there was a group of brash young men. They tried to explore the caverns by fashioning a diving helmet out of an old milk bucket and piping air into the bucket with a long rubber hose. They didn't get very far. In the decades after that, improvements in scuba equipment made Jacob's Well even more enticing. But recreational divers were unprepared for this unforgiving underwater maze. Some lost their way, they lost their breath, they lost their lives. In 2000, trained cave divers began a planned mission to map this place. The Jacob's Well Exploration Project began with measurements and underwater video cameras. The effort would go on for years, revealing a vast entanglement reaching far beyond the expected termination zone. Divers would disappear into the tunnels for hours to take their measurements. To date, approximately 6,000 feet of passages have been mapped in two major conduits, which are simply called Tunnel A and Tunnel B. There is a Tunnel C and D. Those are not accessible to divers. Tunnel A reaches almost a mile from the surface with a maximum depth of 137 feet, the length of a 10-story building. This place is the second longest fully submerged cave system in the state of Texas. It is also a grave. In 1983, one diver confused a dead end with the exit tunnel. He ran out of air and he drowned. Only 4 years before, two young divers entered the well. They never resurfaced. An experienced diver named Don Dibble was charged to go down and retrieve their bodies. He became trapped in an underwater gravel slide in Chamber C, and he himself had to be dragged to the surface by other rescue divers. Don had run out of air. He had ruptured his stomach. Somehow he survived. Chamber C has proven so dangerous that Don returned with a specially constructed rebar gate formed inside concrete. Within 6 months, that gate had been removed, and someone had left a sign in its place. The sign read, "You can't keep us out." Inside that fourth chamber, Chamber D, explorers have found a corroded scuba tank, a weight belt, a femur bone, even a human skull. Obviously, someone had gotten disoriented in the floating silt, and they had drowned in darkness. Journalists, scientists, and everyday visitors have said that standing on the shoreline and looking down into Jacob's Well, it's like looking into a kind of eye, like you're gazing into the soul of the earth. As the corridor goes from bright to aqua to dark blue to black, this place feels populated with the shadows of the victims. 12 victims so far, and for obvious reasons, Jacob's Well only allows trained and certified divers there even today. Put yourself in the suit, in the skin of one of these underwater explorers. You've checked everything from your buoyancy control vest to the weight belt to the oxygen tank. Your mask is sealing properly. Your dive computer is fastened to your wrist. Your flashlight is charged. You are ready, or as ready as you can be for a descent like this. You drift down, equalizing your ears as 10 feet become 20, become 30, and more. The light above goes dim. That 12-foot circle begins to look like a full moon. Around you, there are crevices and cracks and openings. The rock is smooth and then jagged and sharp. The neoprene wetsuit, the only thing keeping your body temperature from matching the 65 degrees around you. 65-degree water means hypothermia, disorientation. You can forget where you are. You can forget who you are. Eventually, the body goes unconscious, putting itself to sleep, and you never wake up. The reality of this danger lingers in the back of your mind as you move into the first tunnel that your flashlight sees. The water is usually crystal clear, but these springs aren't used to the moving of arms and the kicking of fins. Silt begins to cloud your vision. You hold as still as you can, hoping to again see more than 3 feet in front of you. Your gloved hands push you further into the maze. A spiky stone tears a small slit in the leg of your suit. It hurts, but not enough to go back. There are turns and narrows, tunnels and funnels. How long have you been down here? How long until your tank runs out? The numbers on your wrist computer say you're fine, and then the flashlight blinks out. You tighten its lens, you rattle the handle. There's a brief flicker, but then nothing, no matter how hard you try. You break a glow stick tethered to your vest. It is colored blue, but in your brief panic, you kicked the silt and again darkened all the liquid around you. You crawl yourself backward, or are you actually going forward? Which way is up or down, back, forth? Now the only thing louder than your breathing is the sound of your racing heart. Your searching fingers find a corridor. Before you realize it, you have pushed through. You are inside, the hoses on your tank scraping against the stone. The glow stick is not helping. The muddy water is like a thick blue wall. You begin to hyperventilate. The air in your tank suddenly blasts into the cave like a bomb. The rock begins to give way. Your lower body becomes trapped. You cannot move. And then you realize that if you cannot move, you will not live. You will only one day be found. H.P. Lovecraft once wrote these words: "We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far." How many cautionary tales have been born of the stories of those who voyaged too far? Perhaps the earth is trying desperately to speak its warning to us, staring unblinking with an eye that connects to the soul of our world, begging us to stay away to save our lives, or perhaps beckoning us, inviting us to come down, to descend into the darkness and join the others who still sleep in the mile-long labyrinth of Jacob's Well.
It walks in the cold woods of winter. It is a beast of ashen flesh, lean as bone, 15 feet tall. It is a cannibal. It is the wendigo. This creature, both real and spirit, was first described by the early Algonquin-speaking people of North America. Accounts vary from witness to witness, but from the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, the Cree, the Naskaspi, and the Innu tribes, the wendigo was consistently described as something wicked and dangerous, as if the harsh famines and deadly struggles of winter had somehow come to life. The creature was both starving and feasting, hunting for human flesh, never satisfied, never sleeping, impossible to appease. The Ojibwe scholar Basil H. Johnson wrote these words: "The wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, the wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. It is a creature with the vision of an eagle, acute hearing and superior strength. Its horns stand tall upon its head. Its eyes glow, its claws click together. It is a predator and a hunter of men. The appetite of the wendigo is insatiable. The more human flesh it devours, the larger it grows, the more food it requires, so it can never be satisfied. Suffering with hunger, it long ago devoured its own lips. It is the reason children are told not to enter the woods. Malevolence lives there. It eats there, and it walks the villages to feast upon the living. Many believe this to be justice, as the cold, desperate famines of winter caused humans to sometimes kill and eat each other. They betrayed their people. They betrayed nature. And they became marked. The first written account of the wendigo was penned by a French Jesuit missionary named Paul Lejeune in 1636. He was living among the Algonquin people when a woman cried a warning. There was a creature, an Atchen, or cannibal giant, roaring deep and tearing flesh. It screamed for new victims. But why? We gathered and hoarded and stole from our brothers and sisters, until selfishness and cruelty crawled up from the ground to punish the wicked. For the foolish coveting of money and possessions, the wendigo would covet the meat under human skin. And as with our greed, it would only get hungrier by the day. For centuries, indigenous artists have drawn and painted the wendigo as a symbol of colonialism, violence, and the destruction of Mother Earth. Those who cannibalize the forests and minerals and water, who consume men, women, and children, they would themselves become food for the avenger. The planet itself would bring retribution. Some believe that wendigos now walk the world, on every continent, through every region, in every town. The dark side of human nature takes and consumes and harms and kills. People become the devil, so a devil has risen from our deeds. It devours us. It punishes us. It is us. When the nights grow cold, when hearts grow cold, beware the wendigo. It knows us and devours us, even as we devour ourselves.
She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and made medicines for the people of the town. Herbs, roots, tinctures of all kinds. The townspeople were afraid of her, but when their lungs would seize or their children shivered with fever, there was no one else to turn to. They would walk the woods and knock on the door of Bloody Mary. Of course, no one called her Bloody Mary to her face, but it was long believed that the old woman was a witch. Crossing her meant that your wells might go dry, your crops could rot, or affliction could fall upon you or someone you love. If this weathered old crone had the power to heal, it was believed she also had the power to do much more. And And then, during one of the coldest winters in memory, without explanation, little girls in the village began to disappear. One by one, they vanished without a trace. Families and friends searched houses, barns, shops, the church. They combed the snowy woods, calling the children's names. After the third child went missing, a few brave souls even trekked to Bloody Mary's cabin in the forest, begging, pleading for any clue. The woman simply shook her head, no, and slowly closed the door. As 3 missing girls became 4, then 5, the townspeople would take turns knocking on Bloody Mary's door, desperate for a sign. She would always shake her head, no, and slowly close the door. But something about her had started to seem different. Her skin was less wrinkled, its color more blushed. Her eyes were less cloudy. Her hair drifted around her shoulders like little black feathers. Her hands were no longer just tissue-skinned bones. Bloody Mary wore the bloom of youth. Already suspicious, the townspeople believed these things were connected, the vanishings and the witch. But they also knew how ridiculous their accusations would sound to a magistrate, and they feared all sorcery that might be used against them and their families if they angered the old woman. So, they locked their doors and watched their children with great vigilance, making sure they did not leave the house unattended and disappear. In the middle of the night, during the 7th week of these vanishings, the young daughter of a shopkeeper awoke to an enchanting sound coming from the fields outside. The sound penetrated her ears and filled her with warmth and comfort. Without a word, the girl shifted her feet to the floor and walked to the window. She did not see the outside world. She saw her own reflection in the glass. After a moment, she turned and walked out the door. She was being drawn away by a curse that no one else could hear. Suddenly, the shopkeeper and his wife heard a full-throated scream coming from the fields. The man ran outside. Neighbors soon joined him. They scanned the tree line for the source. It was the sharp-eyed shopkeeper who first saw the girl, his daughter, apparently trapped within vines as she had been drawn towards the woods. 100 feet away was the hag, the old woman who had become mysteriously young. Porcelain skin, bright eyes, a gleaming full mouth surrounding icy white teeth. Still recognizable, she was an ages-old version of herself. In her pristine hand, she pointed a tree-fashioned cane, which was glowing like fire. This younger woman stood very still, except for her moving lips. The father and mother and neighbors, the entire town emerged into the moonlight. They had suspected witchcraft, and now they knew for sure. After a mad scrambling for knives and shovels, pitchforks and sickles, they rushed towards the woman with the wand. Bloody Mary broke her spell and fled back toward her home. Dozens of shouting, crying, raging townspeople followed her through the thick brush and dense trees. When they reached her tiny cabin, the witch was waiting to greet them from her doorway. As if realizing what was to come, with a wry smile, the darkly lovely Bloody Mary met the eyes of each of her pursuers and again shook her head. No. She moved her lips again. This time, the sound she made was clear to all. A searing, dissonant siren that brought the crowd to its knees. The words they heard were language, but unknowable beyond the world of spellcasters. The people could not know each sound was a curse, variations on a single promise: revenge. When the old woman finally went silent, she walked into the cabin and closed the door. It was then that the torches were lit. It was then that her house was set aflame. It was then that Bloody Mary was burned to death. As the fire raged, each within the mob could somehow see their own reflections in the window glass. It would be days before a few adventurous men would walk beyond the charred cabin to discover still recognizable graves placed just 200 feet away. The bodies of the children were uncovered. Each of them had been drained of blood. These young victims had been a literal fountain of youth for the witch in the woods. Strangely, in the years that followed, no one in the town met calamity. No curse befell them. No avenger came for them. Each lived a long life without reprisal. But the descendants of the town would not be so lucky. Children would grow to have children, then grandchildren, and with each generation, the young would speak of a scary face living within mirrors. Standing in darkness, enchanted under a spell, those who said the witch's name 3 times would have flesh, bone, and blood drawn into the glass, leaving nothing but mystery behind. Over the centuries, that curse became a legend. The legend became a game. Today, the aging crone no longer discriminates along family lines. After all, youth is youth. Beauty is beauty. So she drifts behind glass in search of bright eyes and smooth skin. Speak her name, and she will drink you like wine. Those who wish to test this fantastic tale are free to do what so many others have done. Center the mirror, lower the lights, take a deep breath, and say the name. Say my name. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
I hope you have been enjoying yourself so far. On our yearly Ghost Stories show, I need to take a very short break, but stand by because there are many more stories to come. If you are enjoying this podcast, I invite you to check out my second Ghost Stories audiobook at audible.com. This is Volume 2, a compilation of original tales and ghostly urban legends compiled over the last 6 years, all brought together. 30 different ghost stories just for you. I have linked the audiobook in the description box, so get one for yourself, do an Audible gift for some other audiobook fan in your own life, get into the spooky spirit, and enjoy nearly 4 hours of haunts, ghost stories, Volume 2, the audiobook, is now available at audible.com.
Dad, what's that place?
It's a cemetery. You know what a cemetery is, don't you?
It's where Grandma is.
It's where Grandma is.
I could see her.
No, her headstone is way back over the hill.
Not the headstone, Dad. I saw Grandma standing with those people.
Those people? What people?
They're all behind us now, back at the cemetery.
What people did you see?
You didn't see the people? They were all looking at us.
Looking at us?
A bunch of them, but they were frozen. Nobody was moving. It was like in my games.
What do you mean, frozen like in your game?
They were on pause, like when you press the button and pause games.
James, there wasn't anybody back there. Everybody in a cemetery is buried under the ground. They're not walking around.
Not walking, Dad. They were on pause.
Fine, you saw somebody who was on pause.
Not somebody. There were a lot of them. They all looked sad.
Okay, they were sad.
Especially Grandma. She looked at me like somebody was in trouble.
What do you mean? Like she was mad?
Yeah. Grandma used to say that we don't really die. She said we get extra lives.
Like in video games.
I guess so.
So, if those people didn't die, where do you think they were going?
Dad, they weren't going. They were on pause.
Ah, they were on pause.
If I was Grandma, I wouldn't be ready to die either. Especially if I was still angry at you.
Grandma said she was angry at me. Why was she angry at me? She said that?
I wasn't supposed to tell.
You can tell me. What did she say?
She said you took things.
I took things?
Expensive things. She saw you going through her stuff.
James, I didn't take anything.
You didn't take the money? Grandma said you took the money.
James, who told you that?
And she said you locked her in her room sometimes. And put bad things in her medicine bottles.
James?
She told me not to tell. She said she would fix it.
Fix it? Fix it how?
I don't know, Dad. She got sick after that. Then she went to the cemetery.
I didn't take anything. I didn't give Grandma anything.
That's what she said you'd say.
But I mean it. I would never hurt Grandma. I would never steal from Grandma.
She was pretty mad. I don't know if she's gonna believe you.
She won't believe me. When?
When she starts moving. Like in my games. When she's no longer on pause.
The recording you are about to hear was first broadcast decades ago on American religious television. Home video copies were soon converted to audio tapes, then in studios and private homes across the country and around the world. Those tapes were duplicated and distributed by the hundreds, then thousands. It wasn't long before these degraded second and even third generation cassette copies became a source of public panic, as the recordings appeared to capture the screams of the damned, miles under our feet, inside a literal well to hell. The story dates back to 1989 Siberia, 3 years before the fall of the Soviet Union. Russian geologists were reportedly compiling data for oil and gas exploration, mining, and the documentation of subsurface activity, led by an individual known in the record only as Mr. Ozakov. The geology team was using state-of-the-art technology, drilling through the Earth's surface to a depth of more than 9 miles, when suddenly the large drill bit reached a massive cavity. Where the researchers expected to find thick magma, they realized they had instead punched into a hollow chamber. They had found a massive cave of fire where none should exist. The work was paused as investigators looked for answers. Temperatures 10 miles deep can reach 900 degrees, so Ozakov commissioned a specially designed and heat-shielded microphone attached to a massive coil of audio cable. From the entrance high above, that microphone would be lowered and lowered until it reached the cavern, activating recorders back on the surface. The sounds documented from that day would soon be leaked beyond Soviet borders to capture the attention of the world, especially those who hold to the biblical warning of Matthew 25:46, and these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Revelation chapter 1 further describes a fiery lake of burning sulfur, the second death. Many historians of hell theology have long speculated that Hades isn't an otherworldly place, but rather a chamber closer than we've imagined. On the day of the apocalypse, after the righteous are drawn up into the heavens, the crust of the earth will dissolve away, and the damned will descend into an eternal torment sitting just beneath their feet. This is a short segment of that audio, allegedly recorded in 1989 by Russian geologists, a recording that is said to reveal the screams of the tormented in hell. The hottest temperatures on Earth are found in our planet's core, estimated by scientists to be more than 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Is it possible that the Earth's center holds billions of condemned souls? Does the boiling and roiling magma that has long brought volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and tsunamis bring disaster of another kind? Early claims about this place originated in a Finnish religious journal. Tabloids eagerly republished and revised this story throughout the 1990s, and of course, in the age of the internet, those recordings continue to be played today. But to date, the story seems just a story. Investigators found that the Soviet Union did have geologists drilling down more than 7 miles in the late 1980s, but not in Siberia. Instead, they were drilling on the Kola Peninsula, which shares borders with Norway and Finland. Geological anomalies were found, but nothing supernatural was reported. No devil or dungeon, no fire and brimstone, no agonized screams. Another version of that story took place not in Russia, but in Alaska. Expert audio technicians have protested that it would be impossible to insulate a microphone to function at 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Engineers examined the recording. They believe the screams were not from an underground hell, but instead were likely taken from a 1972 horror film called Barren Blood. Throughout the years, pranksters have taken those early tapes and augmented them for greater effect. But the things that people fear are so often about what they feel, not what they know. And all of these decades after that first recording was played to the world, many continue to believe that they are not hearing manufactured myth, but what the poet Robert Frost once called a half-filled auditorium. Is it unreal or is it real? Is there a literal well to hell waiting for the rest of us to fill that forever boiling room?
Two-sentence horror stories.
There was a picture in my phone of me sleeping. I live alone. My sister says that Mommy killed her. I don't have a sister. I can't move, breathe, hear, or speak in the darkness of this place. If I had known it would be like this, I would have been cremated instead. I work the night shift alone. There's a man smiling at me on the security camera. I woke up to someone knocking on my bedroom window. Then I realized the sound was coming from the mirror. My husband asked why I was breathing so heavily. I told him it wasn't me. He was cryogenically frozen upon his death. He had no way of telling them that he was still awake. I wondered why my dog always stared at me nervously. Then I realized that the dog was looking directly behind me. They delivered the mannequins packaged in bubble wrap in the middle of the night. I heard the sounds of popping. My mother casts two shadows on the floor. The room has only a single light bulb. A little girl is smiling at me from outside my window. I live on the 14th floor. My daughter won't stop crying in the middle of the night. I visit her grave and ask her to stop, but she just won't listen. I can't sleep, she whispered. I nuzzled against the dress she had been buried in. I live by myself in a large house. I have closed more doors than I have opened. That's the grave where my father was put. A hand reached up and grabbed my foot. I never go to sleep. Why do I keep waking up? The longer I wear it, the more comfortable it feels. The girl had such pretty skin. Mendelssohn's Funeral March suddenly played in my headphones. Then I realized they were not plugged in. I awoke in a wooden box. I hear the hammering of nails. The children are sweet. It's best when you don't overbake them. The woman caught my eye. Why won't she give it back? Grandma locked her valuables in a shiny silver box. That's where she keeps the pieces of me. There's nothing like the laughter of a child. Thank God for shallow graves. The cat was purring in my left ear. I only have a dog. I tuck my son in for the night when he pleads, "Mommy, check for monsters under the bed." I check, and a figure whispers, "Mommy, there's something in my bed." The doctor said amputees sometimes feel a phantom limb. They didn't say I'd feel someone holding my hand. Don't look into the closet. It hates being seen. I stand upon my tall wood box. I know how your window unlocks. My husband woke me and said there was an intruder in our house. He was murdered years ago. I see my reflection. Why are those the only eyes blinking? I keep dreaming I'm killed by a man I've never met. I think he's sitting at the other side of the restaurant. The knife slices just like butter. I used to be a loving mother. The kids admired how high they'd swung. They're swaying right where they were hung. I held his hand as I went on my walk. With any luck, they won't find the rest of him. I wash my hands 10 times a day. The blood just won't come off. Your love keeps me warm, I told my husband. Then the pyre began to burn. They once called me the evil twin. Today, I am the only child.
On the other side of this, I have 3 more ghost stories all queued up and ready for you. And we'll do it next. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Halloween. It is the final segment of our annual podcast, Ghost Stories 2024. A quick note about this next story. It's a poem, for lack of a better word. It first came to the public's attention after being posted on TikTok by someone using the generic handle user6851958. That channel has several poems, origins unknown, but it was this particular post that seemed to catch the public's imagination. To date, that TikTok video has been viewed over 6 million times. Its words have been printed, reprinted, told, and retold for years. Its meaning has been discussed by people all over the world. Is this just an eerie exchange, an interesting and Halloween-y kind of story? Or does it hold a deeper message about those who are distant or different or just very small? I offer my own interpretation of that poem here so that you might decide for yourself.
"10 legs, 8 broken." To the spider, the shadowed creature in the corner of the room, I hate you. You scared me just as your brothers and sisters did before you. And I will tell you what I told them. You are a trespasser that does not belong here. You entered without knocking, roamed freely like this is your home, and decorated my walls with unwanted silk webs without asking. You may not be the only killer here, but only one of us is innocent, and it's not you. The spider says to me, its brittle body squashed and dying, "It's not you either. There is venom infused in my fang-shaped maws, but I was born this way. What's your excuse? If you could count your murders, how long would you be counting? Am I really this threatening? I thought human hearts were bigger than mine. But you have killed with malice instead of marrow of your bones, and poison bubbling behind your skull. And I'm sorry for scaring you. But I didn't know being seen would cost me my life. Maybe if you didn't fabricate the prickly feeling of my legs creeping upon your skin while I crawled across the living room floor. If the webs I weaved were made of cotton candy and captured clementines, cherries and sweet peas, rather than struggling wings and blood. If I had a pink tongue, posh fur, a wagging tail and 4 legs instead of 8. If I had only 2 eyes and they were glittering stars and not massive black holes. If I was the same but looked different. Maybe you wouldn't hate me. Maybe you wouldn't have loved me either. And maybe you still wouldn't have let me stay. But maybe you would have shown me the door or a window. Maybe you would have shown me mercy. But you are still standing, and I am still sorry. I think, maybe, no matter how reluctant, mercy would have been enough.
If you feel your skin go cold, the Whispermen are near. They walk the winds 100-fold, just turn away your ear. Don't approach, do not go near. Their mumblings are perverse. They'll breathe into your open ears, the poison of a curse. Long they've wandered, long they've crept, so rotted and unwhole, craving human flesh to eat and drinking down the soul. Don't believe that corpses rest when buried in the ground. Many of the worst and best arise and drift around. Worms in sockets, bones for hands, their skulls protruding gray. From beneath the blackened cloaks, the teeth all chipped away. Smiling, frowning, hungry, raged, as hollow as a shell, they feast upon the living so they won't fall down to hell. When you hear the whisper men, then you are in their sight. If you listen to their words, it means for you, good night. Just ignore the whisper men, or try as best you can. Maybe they'll just go away to where their haunts began.
Button, Button by Richard Matheson. The package was lying by the front door, a cube-shaped carton sealed with tape, their name and address printed by hand. Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Lewis, 217 East 37th Street, New York, New York, 10016. Norma picked it up, unlocked the door, and went into the apartment. It was just getting dark. After she put the lamb chops in the broiler, she sat down to open the package. Inside the carton was a push-button unit fastened to a small wooden box. A glass dome covered the button. Norma tried to lift it off, but it was locked in place. She turned the unit over and saw a folded piece of paper scotch-taped to the bottom of the box. She pulled it off. Mr. Stewart will call you at 8 p.m. Norma put the button unit beside her on the couch. She reread the typed note, smiling. A few moments later, she went back into the kitchen to make the salad. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock. "I'll get it," Norma called from the kitchen. Arthur was in the living room reading. There was a small man in the hallway. He removed his hat as Norma opened the door. "Mrs. Lewis?" he inquired politely. "Yes, I'm Mr. Stewart." "Oh, yes," Norma repressed a smile. She was sure now it was a sales pitch. "May I come in?" asked Mr. Stewart. "I'm rather busy," Norma said. "I'll get you your whatchamacallit, though." She started to turn. "Don't you want to know what it is?" Norma turned back. Mr. Stewart's tone had been offensive. "No, I don't think so," she replied. "It could prove very valuable," he told her. "Monetarily?" she challenged. Mr. Stewart nodded. "Monetarily," he said. Norma frowned. She didn't like his attitude. "What are you trying to sell?" she asked. "I'm not selling anything," he answered. Arthur came out of the living room. "Something wrong?" Mr. Stewart introduced himself. "Oh, Arthur pointed toward the living room and smiled. "What is that gadget anyway?" "It won't take long to explain," replied Mr. Stewart. "May I come in?" "If you're selling something," Arthur said. Mr. Stewart shook his head. "I'm not." Arthur looked at Norma. "Up to you," she said. He hesitated. "Well, why not?" he said. They went into the living room and Mr. Stewart sat in Norma's chair. He reached into an inside coat pocket and withdrew a small sealed envelope. "Inside here is a key to the Bell Unit dome," he said. He set the envelope on the chairside table. "The bell is connected to our office." "What's it for?" asked Arthur. "If you push the button," Mr. Stewart told him, "somewhere in the world, someone you don't know will die. in return for which you will receive a payment of $50,000. Norma stared at the small man. He was smiling. "What are you talking about?" Arthur asked him. Mr. Stewart looked surprised. "But I've just explained," he said. "Is this a practical joke?" asked Arthur. "Not at all. The offer is completely genuine." "You aren't making sense," Arthur said. "You expect us to believe—" "Whom do you represent?" demanded Norma. Mr. Stewart looked embarrassed. "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to tell you that," he said. "However, I assure you the organization is of international scope." "I think you'd better leave," Arthur said, standing. Mr. Stewart rose. "Of course." "And take your button unit with you." "Are you sure you wouldn't care to think about it for a day or so?" Arthur picked up the button unit and the envelope and thrust them into Mr. Stewart's hands. He walked into the hall and pulled open the door. "I'll leave my card," said Mr. Stewart. He placed it on the table by the door. When he was gone, Arthur tore it in half and tossed the pieces onto the table. Norma was still sitting on the sofa. "What do you think it was?" she asked. "I don't care to know," he answered. She tried to smile but couldn't. "Aren't you curious at all?" "No," he shook his head. After Arthur returned to his book, Norma went back to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes. "Why won't you talk about it?" Norma asked. Arthur's eyes shifted as he brushed his teeth. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Doesn't it intrigue you?" "It offends me," Arthur said. "I know, but—" Norma rolled another curler in her hair. "Doesn't it intrigue you, too?" "You think it's a practical joke?" she asked as they went into the bedroom. "If it is, it's a sick one." Norma sat on her bed and took off her slippers. "Maybe it's some kind of psychological research." Arthur shrugged. "Could be." "Maybe some eccentric millionaire is doing it." "Maybe." "Wouldn't you like to know?" Arthur shook his head. "Why?" "Because it's immoral," he told her. Norma slid beneath the covers. "Well, I think it's intriguing," she said. Arthur turned off the lamp and leaned over to kiss her. "Good night," he said. "Good night." She patted his back. Norma closed her eyes. $50,000, she thought. In the morning, as she left the apartment, Norma saw the card halves on the table. Impulsively, she dropped them into her purse. She locked the front door and joined Arthur in the elevator. While she was on her coffee break, she took the card halves from her purse and held the torn edges together. Only Mr. Stewart's name and telephone number were printed on the card. After lunch, she took the card halves from her purse again and scotch-taped the edges together. "Why am I doing this?" she thought. Just before 5, she dialed the number. "Good afternoon," said Mr. Stewart's voice. Norma almost hung up but restrained herself. She cleared her throat. "This is Mrs. Lewis," she said. "Yes, Mrs. Lewis." Mr. Stewart sounded pleased. "I'm curious." "That's natural," Mr. Stewart said. "Not that I believe a word of what you told us." "Oh, it's quite authentic," Mr. Stewart answered. "Well, whatever." Norma swallowed. "When you said someone in the world would die, what did you mean?" "Exactly that," he answered. "It could be anyone. All we guarantee is that you don't know them. And, of course, that you wouldn't have to watch them die." "For $50,000, Norma said. "That is correct." She made a scoffing sound. "That's crazy." "Nonetheless, that is the proposition," Mr. Stewart said. "Would you like me to return the button unit?" Norma stiffened. Certainly not. She hung up angrily. The package was lying by the front door. Norma saw it as she left the elevator. Well, of all the nerve, she thought. She glared at the carton as she unlocked the door. I just won't take it in, she thought. She went inside and started dinner. Later, she went into the front hall. Opening the door, she picked up the package and carried it into the kitchen, leaving it on the table. She sat in the living room, looking out the window. After a while, she went back into the kitchen to turn the cutlets in the broiler. She put the package in a bottom cabinet. She'd throw it out in the morning. Maybe some eccentric millionaire is playing games with people, she said. Arthur looked up from his dinner. I don't understand you. What does that mean? Let it go, he told her. Norma ate in silence. Suddenly she put her fork down. Suppose it's a genuine offer, she said. Arthur stared at her. Suppose it's a genuine offer. All right, suppose it is. He looked incredulous. What would you like to do? Get the button back and push it? Murder someone? Norma looked disgusted. Murder? How would you define it? If you don't even know the person, Norma said. Arthur looked astounded. Are you saying what I think you are? If it's some old Chinese peasant 10,000 miles away, some diseased native in the Congo. How about a baby boy in Pennsylvania? Arthur countered. Some beautiful little girl on the next block. Now you're loading things. The point is, Norma, he continued, what's the difference whom you kill? It's still murder. The point is, Norma broke in, if it's someone you've never seen in your life and will never see, someone whose death you don't even have to know about, you still wouldn't push the button? Arthur stared at her, appalled. You mean you would? $50,000, Arthur. What has the amount? $50,000, Arthur. A chance to take that trip to Europe we've always talked about. Norma, no. A chance to buy that cottage on the island. Norma, no. His face was white. She shuddered. All right, take it easy, she said. Why are you getting so upset? It's only talk. After dinner, Arthur went into the living room. Before he left the table, he said, I'd rather not discuss it anymore, if you don't mind. Norma shrugged. Fine with me. She got up earlier than usual to make pancakes, eggs, and bacon for Arthur's breakfast. What's the occasion? He asked with a smile. No occasion. Norma looked offended. I wanted to do it, that's all. Good, he said. I'm glad you did. She refilled his cup. Wanted to show you I'm not... She shrugged. Not what? Selfish. Did I say you were? Well, she gestured vaguely. Last night. Arthur didn't speak. All that talk about the button, Norma said. I think you... misunderstood me. In what way? His voice was guarded. I think you felt, she gestured again, that I was only thinking of myself. Oh, I wasn't. Norma, I wasn't. When I talked about Europe, a cottage on the island. Norma, why are we getting so involved in this? I'm not involved at all. She drew in a shaking breath. I'm simply trying to indicate that... What? That I'd like for us to go to Europe. Like for us to have a cottage on the island. Like for us to have a nicer apartment, nicer furniture, nicer clothes, a car. Like for us to finally have a baby, for that matter. Norma, we will, he said. When? Are you... He seemed to draw back slightly. Are you really saying? I'm saying that they're probably doing it for some research project, she cut him off. That they want to know what average people would do under such a circumstance, that they're just saying someone would die in order to study reactions, see if there'd be guilt, anxiety, whatever. You don't think they'd kill somebody, do you? Arthur didn't answer. She saw his hands trembling. After a while, he got up and left. When he'd gone to work, Norma remained at the table staring into her coffee. I'm going to be late, she thought. She shrugged. What difference did it make? She should be home anyway, not working in an office. While she was stacking dishes, she turned abruptly, dried her hands, and took the package from the bottom cabinet. Opening it, she set the button unit on the table. She stared at it for a long time before taking the key from its envelope and removing the glass dome. She stared at the button. How ridiculous, she thought, all this furor over a meaningless button. Reaching out, she pressed it down. For us, she thought angrily. She shuddered. Was it happening? A chill of horror swept across her. In a moment, it had passed. She made a contemptuous noise. Ridiculous, she thought, to get so worked up over nothing. She threw the button unit, dome, and key into the wastebasket and hurried to dress for work. She had just turned over the supper steaks when the telephone rang. She picked up the receiver. Hello? Mrs. Lewis? Yes. This is the Lenox Hill Hospital. She felt unreal as the voice informed her of the subway accident, the shoving crowd. Arthur was pushed from the platform in front of the train. She was conscious of shaking her head but couldn't stop. As she hung up, she remembered Arthur's life insurance policy for $25,000 with double indemnity for... No. She couldn't seem to breathe. She struggled to her feet and walked into the kitchen numbly. Something cold pressed against her skull as she removed the button unit from the wastebasket. There were no nails or screws visible. She couldn't see how it was put together. Abruptly, she began to smash it on the sink edge, pounding it harder and harder until the wood split. She pulled the sides apart, cutting her fingers without noticing. There were no transistors in the box, no wires or tubes. The box was empty. She whirled with a gasp as the telephone rang. Stumbling into the living room, she picked up the receiver. Mrs. Lewis? Mr. Stewart asked. It wasn't her voice shrieking so. It couldn't be. You said I wouldn't know the one that died. My dear lady, Mr. Stewart said. Do you really think you knew your husband? Special thanks to the guest voice actors who helped bring this year's show to life. Daisy Mae Parsons narrated 10 Legs, 8 Broken. D.C. Douglas and Eliza Simon were the father and son on the Grandma in the Cemetery tale On Pause. James Smiley voiced the Wendigo. John Grimes narrated The Whispermen. and Ashley Crossman did a wonderful job on 2-sentence horror stories. Over the years, I've been honored to write, tell, and develop these high-impact theater of the mind productions for you. And once again, I've got 30 ghost stories and urban legends compiled from over half a decade, now in audiobook form at audible.com, which I have linked in the description box. Thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. And of course, happy Halloween.